Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie of Astropath, and we're here today to talk about both Mercury and Venus's upcoming retrogrades because they happen right together. We're doing one video rather than trying to find time to do two of them. So, before we dive into that topic, I want you all to, do all the things. Do all the things that we always want you to do. Subscribe to our channel, leave us messages, share us with people that might be interested in this information, help us build our channel here on YouTube. We appreciate all of you who are here so much. So if you're a returning person to our channel, thanks for coming back. If you're new, thanks for being here. Before we dive in, I want to say a few more things. All the information to find us and to see what we're up to in the world should be below here, below the video. So look for that information. Be sure to order my book, How to Read and Interpret a Birth Chart. That came out about a month ago. And I hope those of you who are reading it are enjoying it. And before we jump in, is there anything else you want to say, Jennie?
No, no meaning yes. Just a quick thing. I'm working on a new workshop schedule for online classes, so look out for that. I've kind of wrapped up my in-person stuff, but I'm just continuing to make these videos with Lori and continuing to send out my newsletter. Please go onto my website if you want to sign up for that newsletter. I keep adding to it. So please check that out, and that's where you'll find my updates. So that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I want to say one more thing too. I would love it if folks out there follow me on Patreon or Substack or both. I'm not doing anything on Instagram or Facebook anymore. I've kind of dropped that. And Substack is where I'm really putting everything.
Mhm.
So there are things that are on Substack that don't have anything to do with astrology. I've been doing some writing recently that doesn't have anything to do with astrology. So at any rate, follow me on those two
Uh,
places as
yeah.
well. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Okay,
Now,
let's dive in.
retrogrades.
All right. What's happening?
There's a
Well,
lot. This is a complicated period of time that we're in the middle
yeah.
of, isn't it, Jennie?
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, let's start with that first slide because that kind of gives some dates. So we're
Okay.
gonna jump in,
Let's
we're gonna show you some slides and then we're gonna have a conversation.
And here, before we go to the slide that Jennie wants me to get to, this will just give you the exact dates. Venus turns retrograde on March 1st and stations direct on April 12th. Mercury stations retrograde on March 15th and stations direct on April 7th. So
Wait,
that's
I had a couple. That slide was perfect. What I wanted to say to add to that slide too is like that gives you the time periods for both of those. But also like you should know that there is an extended period that surrounds both of those. We're going to explain a little bit more about that. But yeah, that was the first slide just to kind of give you the illustration of like this is what we're talking about. These are the dates. It's a several week period. You'll notice that the Venus one is longer than Mercury. Mercury's about 3 weeks. The Venus one lasts considerably longer, about 6.5 weeks. So that's those dates. And then this slide is just, we're like, hey, what are retrogrades? Lori, what does that mean when a planet goes retrograde?
Well, it does not mean that the planet stops up there and turns and goes the other direction because clearly the planets do not do that. They are all always actually moving in forward motion. From our perspective here on Earth, it looks like they're going backwards. And Jennie made this particular image and, equating it with a merry-go-round or a carousel, rather. And how does that equate to a carousel, Jennie?
Well, it's just a really simple way to think about this. We're on Earth. We're watching both Venus and Mercury are, between us and the sun. Their orbit is within, our orbit. So to us, it kind of looks like we're watching them as if they're these horses on the carousel. And it just so happens that when they are on the other side of the carousel, that's what we consider to be forward direction from our point of view. So from Earth, it looks like they're proceeding along as normal. And then they do this weird thing where they wobble and they stop. And then they look like they're going backwards, only from our perspective. And that's because they have now come back between us and the sun. And we're seeing, and it looks to us just like horses on a carousel, that now they're going the opposite way. It's as simple as that. We could get into a much more complicated conversation, but that's really all you need to know, is that it's about appearance, and therefore both of them are about our perspective. And this whole conversation is going to be about how to use the change in perspective to do things in our lives. So hopefully that's clear. I don't have
Well,
anything else to add about this
I
chart.
love it. I love that, using the carousel because you can see so clearly, looking even at that little image, you can see them going in one direction and then going in the other direction, but they're all actually moving in one direction. It's just, yeah, the
Yeah.
perspective. It's just the
No.
perspective. But, we live our lives from the perspective of where we are. So
Yeah.
we encounter these energies as though they are moving backwards.
Yeah, just the final thing I want to add, the only reason why we call one forward direction and one retrograde direction is because it's simply most often in the direction that appears to be forwards to us, and it's less often in the direction that appears to be backwards. That's the only reason. There isn't really like a forward and a backward. It's just all about Earth's perspective.
Yeah.
So
And yeah, okay. Anything else?
I don't think so.
All right, let's move to the next one where we've got the facts.
Facts. Yeah, these are just two little descriptors of some of the nuts and bolts of these cycles. So we're going to start with Mercury retrograde there, and you can see on the slide, the Mercury retrograde, usually is retrograde about 3 months of the year, so about 25% of the year, Mercury is appearing to move backwards. So it's not that uncommon. I mean, there's a quarter of the year where we're really, looking at all the things that Mercury retrograde means, which is a chance to kind of look back at things. We'll get to that in a second. But you can expect things like technological, transportation, and travel issues. Why? Because we have an expectation all those things are going to go forwards and be
Mhm.
smooth and fine. But as we all know, they're not. So these Mercury retrograde periods often coincide with some tricky things. You're like, oh, I didn't expect that to happen. So it's just something to think about. The retrograde for Mercury lasts about 3 weeks. The shadow period, which simply means it's covering the same degrees that it's going to in the retrograde, is about 2 months. So in other words, it touches on that, furthest degree, and then it keeps moving forwards, and then it turns backwards, and it goes all the way back to that degree it touched on.
Mhm.
Um, and then it does this, and it comes back. So that's a simple thing about Mercury retrograde. I'll just add a couple more things about the cycle itself. For the cycle itself is, you've got this 3 month time that it's retrograde, but basically it connects with the sun, and then it passes the sun, and then it appears to pause and turn backwards, go back over the sun. That's the midpoint of the cycle, and then it comes back. So it kind of does this scissor action over the sun, and that's what actually determines the cycle itself.
Yeah.
So I hope that made some kind of sense.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add is, the other issues that come up, yeah, technology, transportation, travel, those are places where we can expect to hit kind of bumps in the road during this time. Also, communication,
Mhm.
just whether that communication be, particular communications that you're having with people or writing projects or speaking, all of these things can also be places where you may expect to hit some road bumps. There are ways to manage this stuff. And I think we're going to talk about that with the next slide.
Yeah, that sounds. So let's talk about the Venus cycle a little bit. The Venus cycle is a little less common. You can see here it retrogrades 5 times in 8 years. So that's about, the cycle's 1.6 years long. And, so what that means is it retrogrades in different signs in those 5 times in the 8 years. But what you'll understand is like right now our retrograde is going to be in Aries, and 8 years ago it was also in Aries. So it kind of had that 8 year, gap. 8 years ago it was in Aries, and then the other four times it retrograded before now were all in different signs. I'm not going to get crazy about that. Just want to mention it. Venus brings up a little more issues with values, resources, finances, relationships, and also one I didn't put on here, but it's anything to do with women, anything to do with
Mm-hmm.
feminine, anything to do with that more receptive principle. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but it really is part of it. And I think that it's definitely going to be part of this Venus and Aries one that's coming up. And then the cycle itself, or I'm sorry, the retrograde lasts about 6 weeks. So it's longer, as you'll see as we get into the dates of this. And that shadow period is pretty long. This one's all the way from the end of January till mid May. So there's a long period in which, the rumblings of the retrograde itself are kind of felt. And there's like a warm up period that we're in right now, of the kind of lead into that. So it is a longer, slower cycle. And I think it brings up more issues with straight up just value, the value of everything around us and how we relate to everything is a lot of what I think of.
And the only other thing I want to throw in here is there's sort of a expectation that if someone is born with Mercury retrograde, it's easier for them during this period of time than for other people. And the same with the Venus retrograde. When you think about Mercury being retrograde for 25% of the year, you can also assume that approximately 25% of the population has Mercury retrograde in their natal chart. Much less likely to have Venus retrograde in your natal chart. But look and pay attention, in your natal chart, if you have Mercury or Venus retrograde, pay attention to how, your experience of these times may be different than what you hear other people talking about.
Yeah, and that's so true. It
Yeah.
depends on your own natal chart exactly.
And it's fascinating. I mean, having Mercury retrograde, having Venus retrograde in your natal chart that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it is really important.
Yeah.
I just want to say one other piece about the Venus cycle, and then I'm ready to kind of move on. I just want to get across that the Venus cycle itself, it is, about a year, 1.6 years long. And it starts, or the way I'm looking at it is it starts at the conjunction with the sun, which in this case happened on June 4th in 2024.
Hmm.
Bang in the middle of the retrograde cycle, or the retrograde itself, sorry, it will connect with the sun again. That's on March 22nd. We'll get more into dates later. But then it won't come back around and connect with the sun until January 6th, 2026. So
Hmm.
that whole, connection with the sun piece is that 1.6, time frame,
Hmm.
and 1.6 years. And there's a whole other story and mythology that goes along with this, but I don't want to go too nuts and bolts on, but it is a cool story. And it does relate to the Inanna myth, which is an ancient Sumerian myth of this idea of Venus having to go underworld and go through her own death, essentially, and really dig into the depth of her value, the depth of worth, and like strip everything, have everything stripped from her, and have to be naked and essentially die and then come back to life. And there's a whole rebirth component to the Venus story, and then she comes back, and she comes back up to the surface, and there's a whole set of meanings and wonderful things that you can think about. It's a very rich mythology, and I really enjoy it, to hear all about it. But just take this away from it. When she goes retrograde, this is a time to really dig into the underworld, and it's not necessarily easy or pretty, and it does have a death component to it. This is not lighthearted topics like wee, yay, I mean, it can be that way sometimes in your life, but there's a real need to get to the bottom, the bottom of things, the bottom of your what you think is worth anything in life. And so I really like that. And the cycle itself does tie in with the astronomy itself too, where Venus disappears from the
Right.
sky. She's close to the sun, she disappears, and that's when she's in the underworld. And if you think about ancient people looking and seeing this bright star, it seemed, in the sky, thinking it was a star, and having it disappear and then appear in the morning,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I love the fact that right now Venus is the evening star. After the sun goes down, you see Venus. And then we're not going to see it at all, like you said. And then after the retrograde is done, I don't know exactly when that'll happen as far as when we'll be able to see it again, but the next time we see it, it's the morning star. I
Yeah.
love watching
Yeah.
that piece. Yeah.
Yeah, I did get these dates off someone else's podcast, but January 10th, it was very visible in the sky, very bright. And I have noticed, you probably noticed how bright it is. It's
Yeah.
been really
Yeah.
bright. And then it's going to start to fade as it gets closer and closer to the sun. And then I think it's bright again in June. That's when it's the furthest away from the sun and you can really see it. So it's really important to
Yeah, it's
understand
been
these are,
reborn by then.
yeah, like
When
it,
it's
yeah, it's really
when it's
awesome.
the morning star, it's been reborn.
Yeah, it's
That,
rad. And
that's really powerful.
yeah, I really like it. And the morning star is the more warrior face of Venus,
Yeah.
and then the evening star is the marriageable face of Venus. So she
Oh,
holds
huh,
both. So
huh.
yeah, I love that.
Interesting. I love that too. That's all beautiful. Okay, are we
Well,
ready to
right.
move?
Yeah, let's talk about what all this means.
Yeah. Okay. Retrograde means review.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot for us to be looking at right now. A lot that I think retrogrades really push us to go to an internal place and reevaluate. And with Mercury, it's reevaluating how we think, what we think about, how we are using our voice, how we are processing information. And the Venus retrograde is about really processing and understanding our deepest values and re-engaging with what we may have just come to think of as, oh yeah, those are our values, those are my values, like it's just ordinary, but we have to go back and really investigate what our understanding is.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I mean, I just think in simple terms here, retrograde and just thinking all the re words, and that's why this is listed this way because it does help you keep you on track. If you can't necessarily remember all these bullet points and whatever, just thinking about the revisit, the review, the re whatever. And you can probably think of a whole bunch of words.
Mhm.
And we threw some on here, but just thinking about that. And I think to me, the biggest difference between the Mercury and Venus retrograde is just simply Mercury's happening much more quickly. It's more common. It's going on more often. So it isn't necessarily the deep dive. I mean, sometimes it can be, but it isn't necessarily as this deep purge and deep dive. It's a little more like, hey, this is a great time to retreat, to pause, to slow down and look at what I mean, I love the way you, Laurie, always talk about, make a to-do list of the things that you didn't do for, since the last retrograde and just make that into a concrete list and then focus on that list. It's such great advice to think about it that way. And that's kind of what this first one, the Mercury part is built on, revisiting the earlier project, focusing on things that need to be repaired,
Yeah.
reworking your goals, understanding like what are the priorities, and then reboot that to-do list of,
Yeah.
as I just mentioned. And I like the idea too of letting information come from other places. It doesn't just have to be very linear. It can be that insight that pops in your head and you're like, where's that coming from?
Mhm.
Or something that comes out of a more therapeutic process more slowly. But all of those things I feel like are very Mercury retrograde. It's a great way to take advantage of that time period.
It's really, these retrogrades really point to the fact that a course correction is required. And
Mm.
that's a really important way, I think, to think about it. What needs to be corrected in the direction you're moving in terms of your values, in terms of your thinking? What's the correction that's needed? And this period of time, while it's retrograde, gives us time to go deep and understand what that correction is. The other thing I want to make sure to say before I forget is look at your natal chart. Get your natal chart out. Look at it. Look at if you have any planets or angles that are between 26 of Pisces and 11 of Aries. Look at that section in your chart. If you have, personal planets or your angles somewhere in that range. This is going to be huge for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I know
Oh.
it's a chunk, it's a pretty good section, right? It's like 6 degrees in Pisces, and it's 10 degrees in there. It's 16 degrees we're covering here. So there's a very good chance that very many of us will be sitting in this. And there's some other key components. But I just want to wrap up just the last thing here about just looking how to use Venus retrograde. We really went into a thing about using Mercury and some general things, but the Venus retrograde I think is a really important time to really dig into, your values, the choices that you make, because the choices that you make are based on your values. And if you don't know your values, you're making choices without crucial information. The
Mhm.
Venus retrograde gives us a chance to go in and really understand where do we make our choices from. This choice is a Libra thing, and Venus rules Libra. So
Mhm.
you're looking at those choices. And you also have to deal with the consequence of those choices. And the Venus retrograde is a time of having to reckon with whatever those consequences are. But consequences give you information, and
Mhm.
they feed back in. It's a feedback loop, feeds back into, well, what are my values? Why did I make that choice to begin with?
Mhm.
And how can I make peace with the consequence? And then on you go. That's what's so key about values. And there just isn't enough information in our society about getting to know yourself well enough to know what your values are, know what your worth is. So I put a thing here about reconnecting to inherent worth. I mean, self-esteem is a Venus thing.
Mhm.
It comes through in other ways in the chart, but that relationship with yourself, where
Mhm.
you hold yourself in highest self-esteem
Mhm.
and high esteem, and that's where you make your choices, and that's how it works. And part of that is your creative talent. Part of that is the way you dress, the way you dress, sit in your house. Like, do you put paintings on the walls? All of those choices that might seem to not be that important are actually a reflection of that original seed part about your own values. And then the finances, of course, are part of that. And then your resources are part of that. But that's where I really think Venus retrograde, it really gives you an opportunity to dig into that self relationship, which is super important
And relationship to others too.
for sure.
Your relationships, the choices you've made, this is a time that you really want to look also at the person sitting across the table from you at breakfast or the person that you go out with on Saturday night. Whatever relationship, really, significant relationships that you're in your life, this is a time that you really are going to be examining. Is it working? Have I made correct choices? Are there things that need to be reworked, reorganized in order to make this relationship work? Relationships are definitely part of this as well.
Yeah, huge part.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
important.
It's kind of funny. I look at this and you talked about value and choices and creative talents and finances and resources and your own inherent worth. And I think, well, Jenny didn't put in relationship because her relationship is so great.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Well, well, I kind of think the reason why I focus on that too is because the original one is the one with yourself, and all relationships
Yeah,
are
yeah,
mirrors to
absolutely.
that. And it doesn't mean that that's the only one that counts. Not at all. But it is
Absolutely.
the seed state, and the retrograde gives you a chance to investigate that. And it is not emphasized in our society. It is just not. And so I think that that's part of the
Absolutely.
reason why I really zoom in on as a wellness astrologer too. Like that's a really key
Yeah,
piece.
yeah.
But you're
But I
right. I just,
also do think it's because you're not in a place where you're really struggling around relationship issues.
well, maybe my primary relationship, but I have a lot of other relationship
That's true. You
problems.
have to deal with
Yeah.
me.
No, but I'm caring for elderly parents. My sister
Yeah,
lives very far
yeah,
away.
yeah,
I'm not very comfortable in groups. Like there's a lot of other relationships and those are all places that Venus rules
yeah,
in my chart. So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of an
Oh,
interesting thing.
and that is, I'm really glad that you just said that because for those of you who know your charts and know your charts well, some of the other things that are going to be impacted here during these retrogrades is not just the houses that hold Aries and Pisces, but also the houses that Mercury rules in your chart and the houses that Venus rules in your chart. So, if you have that knowledge yourself, you can kind of expand this conversation for yourself in looking at your own natal chart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the final thing is what we're going to talk about next year. The zodiac and sign involved. We're about to talk about that. And, the conversation about natal planets, that's for you to look at your chart, as Laurie just said. And then the houses we'll talk about in the individual impacts.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, are you ready to have like chitty chat about Aries and Pisces, Laurie?
Sure, we can do that. You want me to close? Let's close this down. Let's just talk about Aries and Pisces for a few minutes here.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it's crossing that line between Aries and Pisces, from Aries back to Pisces, because Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac and Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. So it's kind of going from, we thought we were moving forward. Here we are plowing into Aries. We're gonna, we're all a little wound up, whether it's from the political state of the world right now, which has us all kind of wound up, I think, to, where in our own individual lives we're wound up, but we're wound up and we're having to go back. So, yeah, Aries is about the wind up. Aries is ruled by Mars. It's the cardinal fire sign. I think of Aries as the screaming infant that demands what it wants and what it demands, rather. Aries is a very, very powerful, aggressive, assertive sign.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the number one numero uno sign in the zodiac. It's what kicks everything off. I think of one of my favorite keywords for Aries is ignition. And you
Mhm.
think about a rocket ship blasting up and all the resources and everything it took to get to that moment
Yeah.
of, and so it's this tremendous combustion of, an enormous amount of power and resources that get put into that.
Yeah.
And I think, I always think about, it's not the easiest to always have this conversation, but I always think about like Aries is the masculine. And I don't mean man necessarily, though sometimes it's appropriate to think man. But I do think about this very masculine outward fire and burn, and move forwards, and it's the warrior, and it's like, it's just all of the aggro and being assertive and all those things. And you can see right away there's a spectrum. I mean, we all need assertive energy, to stand up and to be brave and to access courage and to say no, because Aries says no, and it's not afraid to say no, and no is very helpful. And so a lot of the Aries stuff right now is about no. And there's a lot of things I think that, there's a lot of what I think of as very toxic masculinity of just like, I'm going to be aggressive and hateful, and I'm going to, I'm going to kill and be violent and blah. And you can even think of it as a, just think about road rage, like if you're trying to picture what this energy, it's those times when you get really annoyed in the car and you're, and you get all heated and you're like, wait a minute, I mean, you can easily access that energy. So, and there might be other places for you in your life, but it is that energy of rage and anger and outrage. And it's not that that energy is bad. It's that we know we are working on how to change the way that energy has been wielded against people and against animals, against the earth. And it's time to change that energy. It's time to use it in a different way, to use it in a more constructive way. And that's where I end up thinking, and this is everybody's job. This isn't your job because you're a man, or you're not your job because you're a woman. This is everybody's job, or you're somewhere in between those two, the binary. Doesn't matter. Everybody's got that energy and everybody needs to work with it. So that's what we're all tasked with at this time.
Yeah, we're tasked with really looking at going inward and understanding our own values in regards to that energy. We all have Aries somewhere in our chart. We all have the ability, like you said, Jenny, we all have the ability to be angry. We all have the ability to be courageous, and Aries isn't bad energy. It certainly has a negative side to it. War is a negative side to it. The country we live in has a lot of energy, a lot of Aries energy that is not healthy. We're a very young country, and Aries is a very youthful sign. And I think, when I think of Aries and I think of the country I live in, I think about the number of guns that are out there,
Yeah.
and we need to learn to understand how to use the energy of Aries in a way that is healthy and not destructive. And we need to learn that in ourselves first,
Yeah.
and I mean, Jenny and I, our focus is on individuals. We could go into big conversations about what's going on in the country, but, and we're not shying away from that. But our focus is to help individuals navigate their own lives.
Yeah. And in this time, it's about, figuring out how to respond to these bigger changes that are out of our hands. And this particular video very clearly kind of lays that out, with the astrology. But yeah, that's the focus is like, and I consider myself like a wellness astrologer. So I'm thinking about how do you navigate these times? How do you still have self-care? How do you still develop compassion? How do you, still go about the nuts and bolts of your life and handle things and handle your money and your relationships and all these things amidst this very chaotic thing. So it's not about trying to ignore kind of the political scene or whatever, but it's more about, well, what do we do about it? How do we handle it? I keep thinking this, so that's what this video is about.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's the whole thing is these planets moving into Aries. We're all worked up. We've got anger inside us. We're like, what do we do? We've got to take action. There's just this sense of we've got to take action. But the retrograde says, slow down. You're not ready for the action you think you're ready for yet. And
Yeah.
it's hard to put the brakes on it's hard to put the brakes on Aries. How do you put the brakes on Aries? If I think of Aries as the screaming infant, how do you put the brakes on that? Well, going back to Pisces, right? Going back to Pisces is a great way to put the brakes on a screaming infant.
Mm.
You,
Yeah, that's awesome.
you swaddle them, hold them really tight, because infants love to be held really tight. And then, yeah, you sing to them, you soothe them, you go back to Pisces. You find, even though you might be angry at the screaming infant, you find your own internal peace and compassion and understanding for whatever that infant is going through. And you soothe it, and then you let it go, get back in Aries and grow up.
No, this is a great analogy because that is exactly what this time frame, so that I think it's great, Lori, because it really is that idea of like just in early February, Venus has already gone into Aries, so we're already having that kind of charging up feeling, and then Mercury joins it in early March, so they're both kind of charging into Aries, and it's on until March, and we're like, ooh, game on, I got to do my thing, and then the retrograde, they both turn retrograde. Venus turns retrograde on March 1st at 10 degrees of Aries, and it starts to travel back towards Pisces. And then Mercury stations retrograde on March 15th. And then it's, at the same degree of Aries, almost 9 degrees, and then travels backwards, starts going backwards towards Pisces. So that whole idea, that's a wonderful image, Lori, of like, action right now, the screaming baby, like move forwards. And actually the message is like, not yet, slow down, pause, get your feet under you. And so, so what does Pisces bring, Lori? What,
Ooh, Pisces.
right? If that's a swaddled, calming baby, what?
Yeah, Pisces is such an interesting sign because it's a little bit difficult to understand because it's so expansive, it's so big, it's so, it is the mutable water sign, so it's extremely emotionally sensitive and adaptable, and it really allows, I think of it as the whole range of understanding the collective. You
Mm,
know, the necessity to see the suffering of the world in order to develop compassion. I mean, how far from Aries can you get than that,
Yeah.
right? And to
Yes.
take something from Aries and go back to Pisces, it's kind of disconcerting. It's a little disorienting.
Yes, and that's isn't disorienting such a good word for Pisces too, by definition.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, it is really different. And part of it's because Pisces is the end.
right.
Aries is the beginning of the cycle and Pisces is the end. So Pisces is all about bringing things to a close, having things come full circle, letting things dissolve, like beyond the structure that was built. Now the structure crumbles. I mean, Pisces really is about how we bring closure. And part of the reason it's so discombobulating is because we live in a culture that does not emphasize how to bring things to a close, how to sit with suffering, with grief, with disappointment, how to sit with it without feeling like we have to run away from it or quickly do something about it or, and it really is a
Right.
time to,
Oh,
yeah, I mean, that's what this time period is giving us. It's a gift.
it is a hell of a gift. And as you were saying that, I'm just thinking about, if any of you read my stuff on Substack, I wrote a piece recently about sitting with my brother-in-law during his dying process. And you were talking about that, just like people in our culture in general are so uncomfortable with endings, with
Mhm.
the dissolving the dissolve. I mean, we're all going to dissolve, right? We're all going to die. And going from that state of forward birth of Aries and going back to the process of dissolving and death is fascinating. And sitting with my brother-in-law as he passed, and some of the conversations that came up with other family members that, I don't know or didn't know. And, really seeing how people spend their whole lives avoiding the fact that life ends.
Mm.
And it's interesting thinking about that, thinking about um, the suffering of the end and the compassion that is developed when we sit with someone dying. We soften in ways that can't be described. We soften and we change and we develop an incredible level of compassion to not just the individuals around us, but life itself.
Mm.
I think part of this process is, we tend to move forward all the time. Well, we have to go examine that process of endings. We have to examine what, we have to find compassion in ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're talking, Laura, I mean, first of all, I'm like, ooh, yeah, that was powerful. But what both signs have in common is they both sit at the entrance or the exit, right? They're like the
Right.
gatekeepers, right?
Oh,
And Pisces
yeah.
is the exit, the soft, the whisper of the last exhale, and then Aries is the first inhale and the scream. So they're two guardians of the gate, and they're sitting on opposite sides
Oh,
you know so that's what's
oh,
so powerful about this time, because not only do we have that with both Venus and Mercury going back and forth over that line, moving forwards over it, then going backwards and then moving forwards. About it says three passes through the gateway. Not only is that happening, um but on the bigger level, that is paving the way for both Neptune and Saturn to do the same thing. Both Neptune and Saturn later this year are going to move into Aries. And then as we get closer towards the end of the year, they're going to move back into Pisces. And then they're going to move back into Aries for the final time in early 2026. So this retrograde is paving the way on a more personal level and in our individual lives to prepare us for a cultural dance across that line. So that's one of the reasons why this particular time period is so powerful and it's so important, because part of the message is not to run away from the closing, to sit with the closings and the endings,
yeah.
because that's what we need to do. And that's what this retrograde period we're talking about is doing, in order for a new beginning to happen without sort of just cutting off the what we learned from the last cycle and forgetting about it. It's really an invitation to move towards those harder, softer places the grief in us at what's happening, things like disappointment, sadness, but also there's an idealism of possibility that Pisces brings. There's an imaginative possibility, a
Yeah.
mystic, a mystic new beginning.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, I could get spun out into all kinds of conversations here. I just took
yeah,
some notes. I have a story I have to write now. Thank you for this conversation. This has been great.
yeah. So let's just go over a couple dates because we kind of went into this big conversation, which was great. Um, as I mentioned, so Venus moves into Aries February 4th. It retrogrades on March 1st. It goes back into Pisces March 27th. So we're looking at an end of March as far as that travel back into Pisces. It doesn't go back into Aries until April 30th, long after it's stationed direct on April 12th. So just, look at that first sheet that Laurie put up that had some dates on it. Mercury's doing a much smaller version, of course, because it's quicker. And that is it retrogrades on March 15th, having gone into Aries March 3rd. It's going to go back into Pisces on March 29th, which is the day of the other thing we're going to mention in just a second. And then it's going to station direct on April 7th and move back into Aries on April 16th. So you see these time periods are very closely aligned. 24 Pisces is where Venus is going
Yeah.
back to, and then 10 degrees of Aries.
It's
Yeah.
crazy how aligned these two retrogrades are. They don't usually happen that way.
No.
It doesn't usually happen that they just coincide and overlap and are in the same area. And yes, what do you want to say about March 29th? What else is going
Yeah.
on there?
So the sort of like woo of all this, which already it's like, wow, there's so much going on, but there's also an eclipse cycle. The beginning of the new eclipse cycle is happening March 14th. We have a lunar eclipse at 23 degrees of Virgo. And then we have a solar eclipse at guess what? 9 degrees of Aries on March 29th. So that is the third time that number is being activated, that 9, 10 degrees of Aries. So look at your chart. What do you have at 9, 10 degrees? If you've got something there, you are going to feel this. This is going to be a very important pivot for you. So we have, just to summarize, so that period of time between the eclipses, March 14th, March 29th, that's where the real hoopla about this whole retrograde period is going to happen. That's when there's going to be this temptation to jump on the horse and charge out of the gate and take action and do the thing. But the message of the eclipses and there's retrogrades is going to say, no, actually, your job right now is to pause. You got to tether the horse, not ride
Mhm.
out on it,
Mhm.
and go and make yourself a cup of tea because you're going to need to go and reflect. It is not going to come until later that opportunity to be the hero or whatever, to do the Aries stuff, to be the warrior, to be the leader. That's going to come later, and it's going to come, I think, this is my opinion, but in more sort of incremental opportunities depending on your life, like, oh, I got to show courage here, oh, that needs to be taken action on. But if you've done the necessary work of the Pisces reflection, you're going to put yourself in a profoundly better position to step into that leadership or warrior role.
And, for those of us who have strong Aries components, you're going to have to really keep yourself calm. People with strong Aries components can just take action so fast without thinking. This is going to be a time to really keep yourself steady and allow yourself this space of time before you blast forward. Yeah.
And Laurie reminded me, I got to bring up the other end of it. If you're someone who's not an Aries Marsy type person and your tendency is to kind of retreat and put your head in the sand, it's also not the time for that. Like we do need to retreat. We do need to recuperate. We do need to take care of ourselves, but not to escape the
Right.
reality of what needs to be moved forwards on. So it's both ends of it. If you tend to be more, my Mars is fairly buried. I do have got some strong Scorpio, but I've got these different things. But I'm just saying, like, I also can see the tendency to like want to just put the pillow over your head and be like, oh, I'm just gonna do Pisces, and ooh, where's that pot? I'm just gonna smoke, smoke, smoke.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, that's the other side of Pisces is
yeah,
the escapism, the desire to escape. And I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, there is that tendency as well. So finding that balance, where and when do you need to be plowing forward and taking action, and where and when do you need to, tether the horse and make the cup of tea?
Yes, exactly. And but the astrology gives you this beautiful schematic.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
do you pull back? You're going to pull back, in towards the end of March, the second half of March, especially. When are you going to start moving forwards? In April, like later on, but not all at once. It's going to become clear. Part of the Pisces thing is developing intuition. You trust your intuition. You know when to go. You know when you're going to be needing to step up. So
Yeah, and if you follow these cycles to much of a degree, you over time your intuition around these things becomes stronger and stronger. It's not that the planets are making these things happen. It's reflecting what's happening. So if we are in relationship with the cosmos, so to speak, to think of it that way, if we are in healthy relationship with these cycles, we intuitively know when to tether the horse and get the cup of tea, and when to get that horse moving and, you know, get it plowed forward.
yeah, and the other thing you brought up with the Venus slide, just relationships, and I just want to say this is so much about relationships because there's a relationship with yourself that you're going to need to get to the bottom of with the Aries stuff, the understanding your values, especially with Venus, but also your mindset with Mercury, getting to the understanding of that, and then moving into the collective space and looking at the factor on this one round planet by itself. We're all here together on this one thing and we're all connected by water. Pisces, every one of us has water in our cells. There's oceans touching every shore. I mean, there's water everywhere. So it really is about that relationship, and then that's going to ripple into your personal relationships. So,
Absolutely.
but I mean,
We're back on, Jenny.
we're back in mid
So,
sentence.
yeah, we're back. And what? That's not what I want. Oh, my goodness. Hold on a minute. Documents. Huh. I'm going to pause again because I can't find what I'm looking for. Okay, now let me see if I can open what I'm trying to open. I don't know why it's not opening what I want it to open.
Oh,
Oh, I guess it is. Here it is. Okay, good. Sorry for that little delay. Here we are talking for people who have Aries rising. Now, if you've got Aries rising, all of what we talked about earlier in this video about Aries, you probably recognize very much as a really big component of your personality. With Aries rising, you are probably a very dynamic person, and as we get going, preparing for this Mercury retrograde, your dynamic personality is very kind of geared up, ratcheted up. You feel very strongly that you're moving in a forward direction. And at some point, at the point where the retrogrades occur, there's a sense of something stands in your way. Something restricts that forward motion, and you really are in a position where you need to go back into a very quiet inner place of your own deep understanding. And you really need to go back and look, it's sort of like really taking a break from your own strong personality and looking at what's going on with the suffering of the collective. That's all I can think of with this one. Is it's important for you to look at the suffering of the collective or your own hidden place of suffering, and really use this period of time, this inward period of time, to develop compassion for the collective and for yourself. And that will provide so much information for you that will assist the appropriate pushing forward once the retrogrades are complete.
mhm. Yeah, it's funny because this one is sort of like, well, if you're an Aries rising person, there's a real sort of leadership vibe to you, one way or another, whether you feel that overtly or not. And it really is, this one is like the mirror of you've got to go back and examine your own unconscious or your own like places maybe that you need some therapy that you've been trying to ignore. And what's tricky as an Aries rising person is there's going to be a real tendency to be like, I don't have time for that. Screw that. I'm moving forwards. And so this one, in so many ways, is you're kind of role modeling for the rest of us a very difficult process of having to go,
Mhm.
God, I have to deal with this, this sadness or this grief or this delusion or this, like the all these things, the suffering you've already mentioned. Like I have to deal with this. And there might be some reluctance to do so. And I think that's, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like this sort of a role model one for this one. Hate to tell you, but it's just the truth because it's not difficult. I mean, it's not easy to go back and forth over this line where somewhere in here is your ascendant if you're an Aries rising person. And so you're having to go back into your understanding of collective suffering, just as Laurie said. And also there may be some way in which you feel stuck. There's something about the way you go about your daily business that you perpetuate some sort of self-judgment or self-criticism or maybe even fear about dealing with those things. And the reality is that those fears or those negative spaces or whatever are the things that really can open you to a new level of courage and really give you this, like, there's going to be no imposter syndrome here. Like you are going to step into that leader, kind of more warrior role if you do that work, and you're going to be asked to do that work, and it's going to come across as a pretty loud message, I think.
Yeah, and I just thinking about the perfectionism that you may tend toward in regards to your day-to-day routines and how that perfectionism needs to be dislodged in order for you to develop your own compassion for yourself. You need to dislodge that perfectionism in how you manage your day-to-day routines.
And there might, I was thinking about some before, there might be an element of forgiveness. You might have to forgive yourself for some way that you feel like you have mismanaged your anger or your own hot energy. Like there might be a sense of like needing to just extend yourself an olive branch, like give yourself a break. If that's true, if you have lashed out, we all have. If you've, if maybe it's recent, but that's part of it is the reason why you're examining these patterns is to offer yourself some kindness, some forgiveness, so that you can move forward into this other dimension of yourself. So,
Fascinating. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Taurus rising.
all right. So, those of you with Taurus rising, this Venus and Mercury retrograde business is happening across your 11th and your 12th houses. So, what's going to happen first is you've got this Mercury Venus. They're in Aries and they're lighting up your 12th house. So they're sort of stirring up this, energy, this identity energy deep within your subconscious. Those of you with Taurus rising, you have Aries in the 12th house. So there's always this need to really kind of dig in for self-understanding, to really get, some self-awareness behaviors in place so that you can understand yourself better. You might be someone who benefits from therapy or have benefited in the past or, whatever. Like there's something about that. And it might feel as if you've gotten all hot under the collar about something and you're ready to just go. Like, let's do it. I'm going to respond to collective suffering and problems now, and just really want to. And the message of the Venus and Mercury retrograde, as we've already talked about, is to hit pause if you're feeling that, especially towards the second half of March. Hit pause and let yourself go back. As those planets move back into Pisces, it's the 11th house of community that they're going back into. So, in other words, there's something you need to learn from your community. There's some way that you might be witnessing the impacts of these massive changes, especially in the US, on the community, on the suffering it's, causing. I mean, after all, there's people losing their jobs, there's people losing their livelihoods, there's people stand to lose a lot more. So you're starting to really witness that suffering that's happening in your community. And there's something there for you to learn from, to soften into, to maybe get a better understanding of what maybe is needed, before those planets then turn direct and move back into the 12th house, which will allow you to step into this place um, of accessing your resiliency in a new way and your bravery. There's a real resilience to Taurus. So there's this way you're going to be able to access this deep courage that is long lasting. And that is something people can really use. So yeah.
I just love thinking about that. The fact that what you really need to do is go back and really witness
Mm-hmm.
the suffering in order to develop your own compassion. And there's a piece here also that's really attached to this eclipse that's about letting go of perfectionism, letting go of judgment of how you give, how you offer of yourself. There's some way in which you tend to think it has to be just right in order for you to give love to others or to support others. And that's a piece that really needs to be released in order to do this piece of work that all of these processes are pointing to.
Yeah,
Oh,
nice. I mean, it could also be like a creative block.
yeah,
Oh, I'm not a creative person, so I'm just not going to try to do this creative thing that's burning inside me. And it's like, no, actually, you are a creative person because we all are. And so this is your opportunity to kind of shed, just like you're saying, Lord, like shed that judgment or whatever it is that holds you back from just
yeah,
letting it flow out,
yeah,
part of yourself.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, we're going to move on now to folks who have Gemini rising. If you've got Gemini rising, this occurrence of the Mercury and Venus retrograde starts in your 11th house and backs into your 10th house. So, what we're looking at here is that in some way you have felt very activated by community, whatever community means to you. And when we speak of community in as the 11th house, we're speaking of folks in your life who support you, where you receive love, where you allow yourself to be supported by others. Might be friends, it might not be. It's like minded people that you're supported by. So there's some way in which you have been feeling activated by community or feeling that you need to take action on behalf of your community. And yet here in this process, when these planets go retrograde, it's like you hit a roadblock of some sort, and you have to rethink these things. You have to rethink how you're taking action, how you feel like what you think action is supposed to look like for you. You've got to really slow that process down and allow yourself to be brought back into where this softer side of you that for you is expressed in your career space or in your, the most public area of your life is a place where you you have a softer side there. So you're exploring your understanding of, this might be really seeing how people in public, because that 10th house is very much a public space, it may be really pushing you to look um, at the suffering of people in your public world, because this can be a career space, and so many people are losing their jobs right now. You may be really aware of the suffering of what you see in the public view and really using that to develop the compassion that's necessary in order to take better actions once these planets are back in Aries, back ready to make something happen in your community.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, just you said a lot of things there, and it's awesome. It's interesting thinking about the 10th and the 11th house because they're both just so public. And it's almost like with somebody with a Gemini rising chart with Aries on your 11th house, like there's definitely a suggestion around a leadership potential in front of your community, in front of groups. So that could be part of what this whole picture is. But just as Laurie's saying, like you've got to go back and really understand the suffering or the difficulties or the grief or different things that people are going through in that public, either in your workplace or, as Laurie's saying, in public. So I mean, looking at the two together, it's just like that. You might have that leadership capacity, but you've got to have a better understanding of what you're really doing. I mean, it's very collective. This one focuses on the collective. But there is another subplot that has to do with the eclipses. There's a because one of the eclipses is happening actually in Virgo. And then what's that's bringing into this picture is simply the ideas there's something you need to let go of. There's some way that you view yourself at your very foundation of your being that you need to let go of. That would be the kind of emotional, psychological way of viewing it. But there's some work that needs to be done. There's some criticism or some judgment about your foundation that you think is not, maybe it's not enough, you think it's not enough, and that you can't possibly be any sort of a leader, you can't possibly do these things that are being asked of you because you just don't have that. And part of this whole picture is an opportunity to really dislodge whatever that junk is. There's like a judgment or a criticism or something like. Do you have more to say about that?
The only thing I would add to that is, yeah, I think it's very much the necessity to release some really deep, basic core judgment on the self. But, you might experience that judgment as a judgment of a family member or, that fourth house is home and family. So there's some way that, yeah, at the core of you, you've got a judgment, or you tend to have some criticism or judgment or perfectionism. And it's really important for you to, this is very important to release that internal core judgment in order to allow this process to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
Great. Okay. All right. So those of you who have Cancer rising, this Venus and Mercury retrograde is really lighting up your ninth and your 10th houses. So they're the two topmost houses in the chart. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. So this is happening in a public place for you. And what this is having to do with is there may be some way in which the Mercury and Venus moving into Aries, moving into your 10th house, is making you feel really itchy to get going and hurry up and move quickly and to do with your workplace. The 10th house is your profession. Again, though, it is also simply just the most public house. So you may not have a profession. There might be something going on there, but it's very public. So there's some thing that's being maybe experienced here where it's like, I need to act on this thing now. These things are happening. I need to take action. I need to step into this kind of warrior or leader space, and it needs to happen now. But the message of these retrogrades is actually hold your horses, especially for that second half of March. That's going to be a very important time for you to remember to hit pause, to slow down and say, wait a minute, I know there's something I'm missing here. And when those two planets then retrograde back into Pisces, you're going to start understanding that there's something that you didn't quite have in your worldview yet. There's some source of understanding that comes through the ninth house. And the ninth house, in a nutshell, is about education. So there's some education you're missing, whether that's from travel and you see how other people are living or being affected by these big things that are happening in the world, especially in US politics. It might be that you are enrolled in a course and you start understanding this on another level. It might be that you are, pursuing some kind of spiritual endeavor with Pisces on the ninth house. And all of those things are going to be things that are going to help you develop a deeper sense of understanding, a deeper compassion, a broader perspective of what life might be like for others, right? So I think that that's kind of what these retrogrades are saying, that hold on, you're not ready yet. And that if you develop this wisdom, and you'll develop a stronger intuition in yourself, and you will know what steps you need to take in that very public place later on, like in April and beyond, that are, when you need to step into that Aries space and hold it, and move something forward.
Yeah.
So
So don't
interesting.
go marching in the streets yet. You got to go back. You got to develop some deeper understanding of, like you said, the broader perspective. You don't have enough of the broad perspective to start that marching in the streets yet. And part of what you are being tasked with at this point is releasing some judgment on your own ability to speak up. You
Yeah.
can't march in the streets effectively if you don't trust your own voice.
Yeah.
And so part of it is releasing this perfectionism. You don't need to have every word planned out perfectly before you use your voice. So, yeah, I think that's an important piece here as well.
Yeah, and just one other comment. The ninth house also has to do with law, so there might be things to do with legal issues that also are you're getting schooled in, or it might also have to do with religion, like coming to the understanding of somebody else's religious beliefs. Not that you necessarily subscribe to them yourself, but that you can understand perhaps this other person's perspective. So that those are all things that you may need to broaden your understanding about that enable you to develop compassion, which will then allow you to be the leader you can be through that public space, or the warrior, or the other things. The pioneer is another Aries archetype. So those are all things that will be activated in a much more positive way.
Huh.
So
Okay, let's move on to folks who have Leo rising. If you've got Leo rising, these two retrogrades are happening between your eighth and ninth houses. You know, before we get to the retrograde, these two planets, Venus and Mercury, are plowing forward into your ninth house. You are probably feeling very much like, you're kind of just assertively moving forward in developing bigger understanding, more direct understanding of your larger worldview. There's some way that, yeah, your worldview is a hot area for you. It's a very heated up area and it's very activated right now. You probably have a lot of really big opinions that you want to bring to the table and talk about and all of that. So at some point when the retrogrades occur, there's a sense of feeling like there's a roadblock. As you've been moving forward, all of a sudden you're stopped. And what behooves you is to allow that stopping to happen without struggle, without trying to push against it, and allow yourself to go inward, re-examine how you want to move forward, re-examine your own understanding of courage and determination and bringing these things forward, and then allow yourself to, as these planets retrograde back into Pisces, it's really taking you from your own big opinions to a deeper understanding of what's going on with other people on a really profoundly deep level. As the eighth house becomes activated, you're really looking at how you set boundaries between yourself and others, and looking at understanding those people that might be so different from you, um, and looking at the suffering that people are in the midst of, developing compassion and allowing that compassion to support you as you move back into Aries and are ready to grab hold of those assertive opinions again.
yeah, yeah. I think another piece of this story, just to, add to what you're saying, Lori, is just that it's really important that you identify for yourself your own value, that you look at judgments you've made about your value, or maybe you've been very self-critical, or you're restricting love for yourself in some way, and it's actually holding you back. It's making it more difficult for you to do the thing that you're so good at, which is to hold space for the suffering of others.
Mhm.
So there's something in that, that's one little piece of information to think about. Because part of what's so amazing with the Leo rising is having that Pisces in the eighth house. Like, your well of compassion is deep. And one of the struggles can be that if you give too much of yourself, you sacrifice yourself, for others. And there's a time and a place for sacrifice, but those are usually like big, crazy stories, right? Most of the time, we're trying to figure out what's the balance between how can I be of service, but not overdo it. And, maybe sacrifice my health because I've overdone it to help someone else. So there's a dance there. And the tendency would be to kind of go, wait, I've gone too far, snap, shut the door, slam the door, we're done, we're moving into Aries, and I'm going back in that space. So that's the tendency. And this time period is inviting you to soften a bit around that and figure out how to do that, hold the space, recognize maybe sooner, oh, I'm overextending a bit. Let's not, and making those choices sooner, because that's going to enable you to hold a better, clearer space for other people as well. So I think that's part of the journey with this one. Seems pretty clear to me. So,
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thanks, Jenny. You added a lot in there. And now we're going to move on to folks who have Virgo rising.
okay. Those of you who have the Virgo rising, this one's an interesting one for you because it's happening, or these retrogrades are happening in your seventh and eighth houses. And it kind of goes a little bit like this. It's like Mercury and Venus both move into Aries. And when they do, they move into your eighth house. So that means that you may feel you're all ready to charge forwards. You're ready to set some boundaries. You're ready to, like, you might need to burn that bridge and chuck this one out. And let's go, moving forwards. I don't have time for that. There's a little bit of that energy. And because it's the eighth house, there could be some I think there could be some hidden fear here, because in the eighth house you're being asked to share resources with other people, and that is sure not very comfortable. And with Aries here, there might be a tendency to be like, oh, not touching that with 10-foot pole, I'm out of here. And so what this time period, these retrogrades are bringing to you, it's really a gift, because it's enabling you to say, wait a minute, when those planets start going backwards through Aries and they start getting closer to Pisces, there's a real opportunity for you here to slow down and be like, you know what? I don't know the answer yet. I'm not sure how to handle this intimacy with this person, or how to handle their baggage that they're delivering to me, or
Mhm.
how to share resources with this person. I'm not sure yet. And it enables you to say, that's okay. I'm going to go back and I'm going to have a deeper understanding of who this person that I'm in some sort of relationship with, who they are and what they need, and what are they suffering from? What are they struggling from? What are their griefs and disappointments that they're really trying to reckon with? And it really anchors you in that ability to, look at your own compassion, like soften into that and see with softer eyes. That's kind of what's being asked of you during the retrograde period. And then once those planets then turn direct again and they start picking up speed and they go back into the Aries house, you're going to have a much greater understanding and a much greater ability to be forgiving, to be kind in whatever action it is that you choose as they move back into that eighth house. So that's a little description of the process.
And maybe you'll have a little more courage to be vulnerable in those eighth house areas.
Mm-hmm.
This one's a little too personal for me, Jenny. I have to
Hey,
say.
you brought up vulnerability.
Well, as you were
Yeah.
talking about, Venus and Mercury plowing through that, and like, I'm not going to share my vulnerability or it's like, oh, yeah, that sounds kind of familiar. But part of the story as well, for those of us with Virgo rising, with that eclipse that happens, is, as this process is moving on, really realizing that we don't have to be perfect, releasing that expectation of personal perfection. And, also, as you were talking, I'm thinking, here we are, we're in the middle of Pisces season. The focus has been on relationship. And then with these planets plowing into Aries, into the eighth house, it's like, if things aren't great in the relationship, I'm out of here. That's such a typical Aries thing. I'm out of here. Well, slow down, go back. Like Jenny said, develop a little more understanding and compassion for whoever you're in relationship with, which will be a much easier thing to do if you are able to release some of that expectation of your own perfectionism.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the really the key that fits in the lock here is that the reason why you want to hightail out of here is because you've made some kind of judgment about yourself.
Right.
And there's a fear. Like I do think that the Virgo Pisces, the lunar eclipse we're talking about on March 14th, like it does kind of bring up the fear and like less than feelings, right? It kind of brings up I mean, there's a lot of things hidden in Pisces. But anyway, it's about just having to be kinder to yourself because that's what gives you the permission to say, wait a minute, I got this. I don't have to be afraid of it. It's okay. So
Oh, my goodness, you almost made me cry. Okay. We're going to move on before I do, and we're going to talk about people who have Libra rising. So if you have Libra rising, this retrograde of Venus and Mercury is happening between your sixth and your seventh houses. So basically, we're in Pisces season. The focus has been so much on your routines, how you manage your day-to-day life routines, your health, all of that. And then these planets, Mercury and Venus, moving into Aries, you're all ready to take action around your relationships, maybe friendships, maybe partners, but there's really been a lot of forward motion into, assertively approaching and working with relationships. Then, of course, the retrograde, we hit a wall there, and there's something before we can take on that, developing more courage in our relationships, developing, really being assertive in our relationships. Before we can do that successfully, we've got to go back. The retrogrades bring us right back into the sixth house, which is a place where, we're really able to see we really need to develop some compassion around how we are working with our health issues, how we're working with our day-to-day routines. We have to kind of stabilize that part in our own life before we get into this assertive relationship style. This, because it is going over that line of the ascendant, it brings it from an outside, out in the world perspective back into an inner process. So it's really bringing us back into our own routine, the processes of our own routine life, and developing compassion there before we can go into this more assertive part of what we're developing in relationship.
mm. Yeah, and I think, with Pisces on the sixth house too, like there's a real need for a spiritual component or a mystical component or a magical component to those routines. Like it really needs like to have this kind of flow feeling to it on some level. So there's almost like a need just to make sure that you have that touchstone. You know how to access that, whether it's a meditation practice or some performative art thing you like to do, or some other thing that you do on a regular basis that in any way, shape, or form forms a practice or a routine. So I do think there's a need to just make sure that there's a real strong cultivation of that. And especially like just as you say, Lori, especially because it's right on the, you're going from the bottom half of the chart to the top half of the chart. I mean, we're really sort of saying, wait, 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 wait. The retrograde saying, hold on, just no, you just need to go ahead and give yourself permission to have some of that mysticism and let it, go forwards into the relationship, whatever it is that you're forming with someone else, once those planets then turn direct. And I think a hidden piece of the story here too is that there could be some deep unconscious patterns that the actually not even patterns, but like beliefs about yourself that are holding you back, and it's time to just check on those. What is that? Is there something that's holding you back? Is there some judgment? I'm not good enough, or some criticism? No, it's not good. Well, I've messed up all these other relationships, so I'm going to mess it up again. That could be something that's deep within, your psyche that it's time to let go of. Easier said than done, but gosh, awareness is the first step. So that's part of this picture too. There might be something there for you to really dig into, look at, and let that be the thing that unlocks the door to allowing more magic and mystery and
Mm.
mysticism into your daily life. And then that is only going to make you like such a sexier partner.
I
You're gonna
like that.
you're gonna be a lot more spicy when you got that with you. So that's kind of what
Yeah.
this that kind of brings in. So
I like that. The only other thing I feel compelled to say, because I keep thinking about it as we're talking, is people with Libra rising, having Pisces there in the sixth house, it's a really interesting place to have Pisces because
mhm.
I imagine it, bringing magic into your life in a routine way, but it's almost like the day-to-day routines can just hold that space.
Mhm.
Thinking of you see Pisces there, it's like, oh, it would be so good for you to develop a daily practice of meditation. But you can also create your whole life to be a meditation with that Pisces there in that sixth house. I like
Oh,
thinking
good.
about that as well.
Nice, Laurie. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, let's move on to folks who have Scorpio rising.
All right, so if you have Scorpio rising, the Venus and Mercury retrograde situation is happening in your fifth and your sixth houses. So essentially, we've been kind of painting a little picture, and what this time period may look like is something like Venus and Mercury moving into Aries, and then moving into your sixth house once they do that. And really lighting up, putting some heat to those routines, like the day-to-day life that the sixth house represents. Um, I mean, the sixth house in a lot of ways is the fabric that makes up your lifestyle. So all those daily decisions that you make that end up summarizing, a large way that you spend your time. So there might be a real tendency here with both those things moving to Aries, be like, okay, I got this. I need to do these things for my health. I need to move forwards. I need to activate. I need to be the leader. I need to, really start jazzing up all these Aries things. But what this retrograde or these retrogrades are bringing to you is whoa. Slow down. Like you don't have to do that part yet. You're going to get to that. But what it is saying is like, actually, when these two planets retrograde and they end up both going back into Pisces sometime in the second half of March, which is when you're going to really be wanting to think about this pause, and inviting you back into the fifth house where you have Pisces. And the fifth house, when you have Scorpio rising, is a lot about, in my opinion, the flow state. What are those things that you just totally lose yourself in? The art project that you're just super excited about, or maybe it's playtime with little children that are just like so fun and bright, that you just kind of lose yourself in this playtime. That's what the fifth house represents. So that's what's awesome. It's like inviting you back in, saying, hey, what compassion do you need to develop? What softness do you need to develop here? Where do you need to be frank with yourself about where some of the suffering of the world is and where it's happening? Because I will be saying like a lot of the political things they're gonna do things to children. So it also might be a time to kind of recognize that and let that, as hard as that might be, sink in and be part of that creative process and be part of the flow state and be part of how you fill your own cup and kind of dedicate yourself to almost like a universal love is what this could suggest. And it might be other things too, but this is just what's coming to mind. And then when those planets turn back around and go back into, Aries, you're going to be much more equipped to bring that compassionate understanding, full picture of the joys and the griefs of other people and be able to fold that into, a new way of being in the world, a new way of, stepping up and perhaps incorporating those warrior leaderly like energies into your a daily practice, into a daily way of approaching the world. So there's some big process going on here to do with that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In order to develop the courage to live your life the way you need to live your life, you need to go back, re-examine all of that, and then re-examine and fill yourself up with more compassion and more of an understanding of how you give of yourself through compassion. And part of the other little piece that we're looking at is the fact that um, a necessary thing for you to let go of is this idea that you very well may carry with you. With Scorpio rising, this idea that in order to receive support from others, you have to show up in a really perfect way in front of whatever your community is. There's some perfectionism in that area that is so important for you to release, because if you can't release that, then you're going to have a really hard time with the process of re-examining your values and allowing yourself to bring yourself forward at the end of all of this.
Yeah. So, ask yourself, as a Scorpio rising person, you may well have some judgments about how you show up in the group space.
Yeah.
Because you might think that people like, oh, people don't like Scorpio, and like, ooh, I kind of show up as there's some darkness here or whatever. It's like, it's time to drop all that, because we all have multiple levels, right? And your power as a Scorpio rising person is something that is needed in the group space. So it's, yeah, if that's what it is, slough it off. Just
Absolutely.
like that overnight. No problem.
All right. Okay. Let's move on to folks who have Sagittarius rising. If you've got Sagittarius rising, these two retrogrades are happening between your fourth and fifth house. Here we are. The planets moved through Pisces, went into Aries, into your fifth house. You are all wound up around some manner of giving of yourself. You feel this really strong determination. You want to take action on some creative project or on some way that you give of yourself. It could have something to do with children. It could have something to do with love affairs, but there's some way of giving of yourself. I like to think of it, yeah, creativity is a big area, but it depends, how it shows up for you. But you've got this real determination in that area of how you give of yourself. And as you're, all geared up and ready to go forward with that, we hit this roadblock with these two retrogrades, and both how you think and what you value in life have to be reconsidered. You need to think about how you're using these assertive, aggressive energies. And in order to really develop yourself in a way that is going to create a positive movement in giving of yourself, you need to go back and go back into Pisces, into the fourth house. There's something for you to learn that is going to really involve going into a deep core of who you are and how your life has been developed through family, home, ancestry. There's something in that. Looking at the family, what you've inherited from your ancestry, some level of suffering perhaps, or some level of magic or intuition. There's something in there that you need to go back and gather up. Maybe you're gathering up compassion, or maybe you're gathering up magic and then bringing that forward into how you are going to um, bring your creativity forward in a really direct way. So that's kind of the process of what you're doing here.
Mm. Yeah, I was just thinking like taking the fourth and the fifth house together. It's like it has a lot to say. I mean, one level, it's like family, because it's, your family, that's your home life. And then the fifth is the children. So the two together could be the whole family unit if you have kids. It's one way to look at it. So it's that. Maybe it's like learning that compassion at home before you move forwards and making decisions about something that needs to happen with one or several of your children or whoever you have. So that's one way to take it into that literal place of that. But on a more creative level, which I think Laurie really explored well, just that idea of maybe developing compassion from that deep internal psychological foundation place, and then allowing yourself to move forwards into a new type of creativity that before you weren't bringing that level of consciousness to it. You're bringing a deep level of consciousness to some sort of creative pursuit. I mean, the fifth house could be so many things. It could
Oh
be the
yeah.
arts, but like I think about that's also a place for recreation. I mean, as someone I do a lot of cycling and skiing, like that's going to be a place where you express yourself in those ways too. So there's a lot of different things you can bring there. But there's the other little side note to this story is that because there's a lunar eclipse, bang in the middle of March, that kind of tips you off that what that symbolizes is a little bit of the need to dislodge some kind of judgment you've made or some kind of need to be perfect at work, like in your most public, probably in your professional life, there's something there where you've made some kind of, I don't know, like I think of it as a judgment and made a decision about who you are in that workspace that's actually holding you back from your ability to, be in these compassionate spaces and reconfigure yourself as a creative person. So there's some link there. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but think about in your life, like, is there some kind of judgment you've made that really shows up in a public space about yourself that it's time to let go of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing with the eclipses are going to be happening. There's going to be a bunch of eclipse activity in that area for a period of time now, going forward as well. So, keeping that idea of how perfect do you have to be in the outer world? How perfect does your career have to be? Whose judgment? And, really releasing that judgment of yourself in the public is going to be a important theme for a while now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Great.
I think we can
Okay.
move on to folks with Capricorn rising.
Okay, so those of you with Capricorn rising, this Venus and Mercury double retrograde is occurring in your third and fourth houses. The picture looks a little bit something like this, where Mercury and Venus both move into Aries, and then they chart, and when they do that, they enter your fourth house. And what that does is it kind of invigorates or enlivens that fourth house. It jazzes it up and it maybe introduces a note of impatience or something that needs to happen now into that fourth house. The fourth house is your home, your house, where you live. It's also your family life. So those people that are in your home that you're living with. So that's some of the where that heat may be. It also can refer to your family of origin. So that might be that you feel really driven or really motivated to make some decision right now, really quick about those topics. I need to move. I need to put my parents in a home. Like, those kinds of things could be topics that would come up. But because these two are both turning retrograde, the best advice that we can offer is to hit the pause button if you feel that, especially in the middle of March. Hit the pause button. Let yourself soften and relax because both those planets are going to start moving backwards, are going to be moving backwards in March, and they're going to go backwards into Pisces. And that's going to take you into the third house. The third house is your voice. So it's almost like you need to go back and learn something new about the way that you use your voice. Or the third house also simply can be learning. You may just need to learn another layer of what it means to be compassionate or what it means to understand someone else's suffering or what it means to witness grief or have your own grief. I mean, those are all Pisces topics. So there might be something that you need to go back and learn from. And once you do that, once you kind of surrender to that process and say, okay, I've got to, this is part of what I need to learn. Maybe it's that you're learning how to speak about deep spiritual issues. That could be another way of looking at it, that there's something so you can go back and learn that. And then once those planets then station direct and go back into Aries, you're going to take that newfound voice that you have, this much deeper, broader voice, like your ability to address maybe more challenging issues or spiritual issues. You're going to have that tool in your toolbox. And so that's going to allow you to make whatever decision that is that you need to make in your fourth house to do with your house and family of origin and family members. So there's some process here that has to do with those. This is a very private process for you as a Capricorn rising person, at least for the most part.
It's interesting. I was thinking about it too as the third house, being, your neighborhood. the
Mm,
the people in your life that you don't really choose, your neighbors, your cousins, whoever. And thinking about it like you're plowing for, this is what I was thinking. You're plowing forward with that Aries energy. You want to protect your family. Well, you've got to go back and see what's going on in your neighborhood
Mm,
before you can fully protect or enliven or move forward with your family. You got to see what's the suffering in your neighborhood and developing some compassion there before you can move forward. So I was thinking about that, but then there's also the piece of that the eclipse brings in that suggests that there's some way in which your higher understanding, your worldview itself, there's some place where you're very critical of your understanding of your worldview, maybe, or you're critical of your maybe you have some criticism around your lack of education. I don't know. There's something about your worldview that you have some criticism around that's really important that you release that in order for you to do this work of bringing compassion into your conversations or understanding what your neighbors are suffering and bringing that forward to move you ahead with your family.
yeah. Say it could be just pretty simply that you could have a very critical worldview of other people, where you're just like, well, this is
Yeah,
like this, snip,
yeah,
snoop, and
yeah.
just judge, that could be a piece. I really like how you brought the neighborhood in because that paints this picture of like trying to grasp these two houses together. If you live in the US, we live in a country that very much focuses on your family and your home life, but it does not focus on your neighborhood and your community. And I think that third and fourth house sit next to each other. I mean, they're like the next level out of family, whether you like it or not. It might not be people you like at all, but that doesn't matter because you live in the same spot. And I really like that you brought that up because that is exactly true. And you know, quick little digression. I slid off the road and went into a ditch the other day. And
Oh,
who should come along in about 5 minutes, but some very helpful fellow with all the right equipment. And, the three of us, as with my partner, we dug everything out and got everything going. And I was back on the road in an hour. And like that is one of those experiences where you are just so thankful for the common person who, with the common decency, who's going to come pull you out of a ditch. And that's what this one makes me think of and how important those commonplace experiences are. And as a Capricorn rising person, that's where a lot of this really interesting learning comes from you is in that commonplace type of environment. So yeah, that's what it
that's
made me think.
fascinating, isn't it? I love that.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, we'll move on then to folks who have Aquarius rising. If you've got Aquarius rising, this double retrograde of Venus and Mercury is happening between your second and third houses. So, we can think of it as just kind of the arc of a story that Mercury and Venus, your thought processes, your values, move into the third house, and you are all geared up and ready to have conversations, to be the warrior in your neighborhood, however you want to look at that. The third house we can think of as communication. We can also think of it as our immediate environment, the neighborhood we live in. We can also think of it as the people in our lives that we didn't choose. Our siblings, our cousins, our neighbors, the person that checks us out in the grocery store. All of those kind of common everyday relationships are part of the third house too. So this is the area where, you've got a lot of courage and determination and just drive to move forward in those areas. You probably don't have real I was going to say you probably don't have real strong filters with your voice, but that depends on a lot of other things, but you may speak up very quickly about things. So
Mhm.
Mercury and Venus move in there and you're ready to tell everybody like it is. And then you hit a wall. In some way, you hit a wall and you realize that you really need to rethink how you're thinking, what your values are. And this process is going to bring these planets back into Pisces, into your second house, where you are going to really need to think about your own personal values.
Mm.
Your values are much softer and more emotionally sensitive than your words would belie, right? Like you might be like really direct with your conversations, but your values are very compassionate, very, there's kind of a mystical element possibly, or maybe some confusion around your values. And you really, part of this process is going back and looking at that and really um, negotiating with yourself how you are going to re-navigate your way of thinking and your values in order to develop, in order to bring the compassion of your values into your voice. I guess
Mm.
that's how I would think of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think with this one, I mean, the second house can be, the tangible, the finances, the resources, and that was certainly the more ancient way of viewing it. And then when you introduce the psychological layer, now we're at self-worth and, the inner, the valuing of the self. And I do think this one, there's great benefit towards developing a self-compassion practice here. And contrary to any sort of judgment about that, self-compassion is really what helps open the door to your overall kindness. I mean, it's not the only way. Obviously, you're compassionate to other people, and there's a two-way street there. But there's something very important about just developing that self-compassion with an Aquarius rising chart. Because Aquarius rising, it's like you might be a fairly unusual person, maybe a little quirky, maybe you don't quite fit into some of the cultural norms and so on. And the way to kind of work with that is to give that softness and kindness to yourself. And then as you're saying, Laurie, like, and then yes, you have this really brave way of speaking up. And I can think of somebody with this, and yeah, there's a lot of courage in how they speak up and confront issues in society. And it's just like, this is what happened, and I really like that. But when you, as you're saying, put the two together, like that's really awesome to come from that place with that deep understanding. And the other piece here is that because these retrogrades are happening during a pair of eclipses, there is a real suggestion that there is maybe some kind of judgment or restriction or rigidity in how you deal with other people's baggage. That at this time, it will behoove you to let go of. It's a really good time to kind of have that understanding of, oh, it's time to just let go of that restriction because actually it's not really helping me. So there's some question there. So ask yourself about that. Is there some kind of, need to be, I don't know, show up as kind of perfect in the presence of other people's baggage or some kind of judgment or fear around not being able to hold that space well when other people come to you with things. So there's some question about that there's a new skill set you can develop around that that's going to inform this whole process around you developing more compassion.
Yeah, the other way that might show up as you're talking about it, that there might be a way in which you are really judging your own ability to set boundaries.
Yeah.
You may feel like you have to be perfect at setting boundaries. You've got to release whatever it is in that area. I mean, where we set boundaries is where we are navigating other people's deep issues. So that, yeah, there's some way that you're probably stuck in some sort of judgment around that, whether it's the judgment of other people's stuff or whether it's the judgment of your own ability to hold and maintain or develop boundaries, one or the other. But there's something there that needs to be released in order for this process to work smoothly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Awesome. Okay.
on to folks with Pisces rising.
Oh, okay. Those of you with Pisces rising, this retrograde, double retrograde, in fact, is happening in your first and second houses, which, I mean, those are about as personal as you can get. So essentially, there's this whole process that's going on. Venus and Mercury both enter Aries, at which point they go into your second house. And it really kind of hypercharges some heat or some type of need to make some kind of decision right now based on the values right now and what you know right now. And it could be a financial decision. The second house is finances and your resources. So it very well might be that as they come into your second house, you feel motivated to take some kind of immediate action. I could see this easily happening, like, oh my God, like things are changing. I have this investment. I need to change. I need to pull the money out, or I need to do something different. That would be a good way to think about it, even if that's not your situation. And the truth of the matter is that those planets, when they retrograde, they're going to retrograde all the way back into Pisces. And when they retrograde, the message to you as a Pisces rising person is just to pause, like to stop, to slow down. You don't need to make a decision based on your values or based on your finances or whatever at this immediate moment. In fact, what you need to do is go back, and when those planets go back into Pisces, really recognize yourself as a person who has a lot of natural compassion available at your fingertips if you let yourself. So it might be that you are struggling to see yourself in that way, but as a Pisces rising person, you have a well of compassion potentially at your fingertips. You just need to become aware of it and access it. And that's what this retrograde period is about. It's about letting you go back and soften and look at, how are you feeling? What are your sensitivities right now? Are you struggling with grief? Are you struggling with, sadness or depression? Or are you ready to incorporate more mysticism or magic into your life in some way? And those are the types of questions that the retrogrades will sort of put a focus on when they go back into Pisces, and have you give yourself this pretty awesome opportunity to understand yourself better, to
Mhm.
really grasp that you have this way about you where you can really, offer healing and compassion to people at a really difficult time. And that recognition alone is what's going to let you, once those planets move back in their forward direction, go back into Aries and light up that second house again, you're going to be able to make a really informed decision about whatever it is you're grappling with that has to do with your values, the way you value yourself, or your finances. So that's a little bit about that process.
Yeah, that's great. I like thinking about them moving back into your first house, back into Pisces, and really looking at yourself. I mean, this is, like Jenny's saying, this is a time to learn something about yourself and to accept who you are, and whatever suffering or grief that you have or are currently encountering, not to just blow past it with those planets going into Mars. It's like go back and feel it and allow, your own self-compassion to really arise. Because that's what you need to do. Now, the other piece that we want to bring in here is with the eclipse that happens in the middle of all of this, that because we're in the middle of eclipse season as well, we've got the in the seventh house, there is something about your judgment. This there's an area where there's something that needs to be released around relationship. That doesn't mean break up with your partner or anything like that. I mean, it might, but I don't expect that's what it is. But there's releasing some judgment you have of a partner, or releasing a judgment you have of who you are in partnership, how you engage with others. There's some way that you may feel you have to be perfect at that. And this is a real message. You're developing compassion for yourself. So, along with that, releasing this expectation of perfectionism in relationship is a part of this.
Mm. Yeah, nicely said. Yeah. Yeah. Relationships are mirrors, right? I mean, they're not only mirrors, but they have a mirror component, and they help you develop that self-awareness. So during, a Pisces rising person, it's not the easiest to get to know yourself. You're pretty nebulous, right? You're like the ocean. So partnerships are a great mirror for having some grounding and some understanding about yourself. So I like that.
Absolutely. That's great. Okay, I think we have come to an end, Jenny.
Oh my goodness.
Wow, this has been the funnest video I've ever made with you.
Awesome.
I
That's
mean, you almost made
really,
me cry in the middle of it. What's better than that, right?
whoa. Right. Well, thank you everybody. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them. This was really fun making the video with you, Lori. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you too.